everyone. My name is Tara Andringa, and I'm the Executive Director of Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, or PAVE. And we're excited today to hear about a virtual field trip to an autonomous vehicle maker. Our guests today are Omar Assad from Perceptive Automata. Omar, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Wonderful. And Gregory Frank from E2 Adventures.
Thank you, Tara.
Hey, Greg. And Greg, I want to start with you. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about E2 and what you do and why you sought out a field trip at an AV company.
That's a really great question. So E2 Adventures is a not-for-profit organization, and we're pioneers in the world of live interactive field trips for kids in grades 6 to 12 to visit industry virtually. So from their classroom, interacting with experts in the field. And the whole purpose of our program is to get kids excited about industry and all the innovations that are happening every day that they wouldn't really ever get to see in a normal school day, exposing them to real world problems from design to sustainability challenges. Everyone knows that what's going on behind the scenes of industry is so important to the future, and it's this generation that will inherit and eventually run that future. So it's real, and on the other side, we're also showing them the real life applications of what they're learning in school, from science to technology, mathematics, languages, and their other courses. So our field trips used to be in person, but now that they're virtual, we have hundreds to thousands of kids participating from all across the US and Canada. And we're working with autonomous vehicle companies to tell stories and reach new audiences because, as I said before, the world is changing and autonomous vehicles are at the forefront of that. And so whether we like it or not, the next generation needs to know about it and start actively engaging it from a young age so that they can be drivers, to use a pun, in this industry.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's amazing what you do. Omar, I'm hopeful that you can tell us a little bit about Perceptive Automata and what it is that you do.
Sure. So at Perceptive Automata, we are working on novel AI technologies that leverages psychophysics and cognitive sciences and human behaviors to enable AVs, an autonomous vehicle, to drive in complex situations where there is difficult interaction with pedestrians. In the traditional AV industry, the techniques that are used today are mostly based on physics that will just look at human as moving objects in the scene, and they lack the understanding of the human intuition. And in difficult cases, let's take crowds, for example, moving in an intersection or in a pickup drop-off areas, this becomes very challenging situation for AVs. So we are leveraging this AI and the use of psychophysics to allow the AVs to drive safely and have a human-like behavior in these situations.
Such interesting work and exciting that the kids got to see it. So really do want to hear about the field trip. Greg, can you tell us about this specific field trip? Who were the kids that the field trip was for? Where were they? And what were the goals of the field trip?
Absolutely. And I'm so excited to talk to you about this because the trip that Omar helped lead is one of my favorite trips. So it's called Rich Inheritance, and it's all about nature versus nurture. But this trip turns that debate on its head. We start with nature. So what are the aspects of myself that I can't change? Let's think 23andMe, Ancestry.com, really going into DNA and genes. And then we look at the nurture component with other experts, and they're showing kids MRIs, CT scans, talking to us about how our behavior every day changes who we are, either externally, internally. And the way we connected this to AVs, this debate that so many teachers and schools across the nation are talking about, is by saying, okay, now that I understand who I am, what I am, where I come from and whatnot, how are robots starting to understand this? How are robots starting to understand human intention? In comes Omar from Perceptive Automata and showing students this whole world to this audience that would never previously have been possibly interested in robotics, automation, artificial intelligence, AVs. And we're essentially channeling this whole debate into this new fertile territory for the industry. And so who is this audience, as you asked? There are classes from grade 6 to 12 participating in math, sciences, social studies, and language arts. Almost nobody knows about or knew about autonomous vehicles and what's going on in the space beforehand. And our educational goals were really to get teachers to start using AVs and other global trends as examples in their class, and to get students actively engaging with these real world situations.
Amazing. And Omar, curious from Perceptive Automata's perspective, what was the opportunity you saw on the field trip, and what aspects of your work did you see as serving the educational goals of E2?
Yeah, definitely. When E2 reached out to us for this field trip, we immediately saw in this first and foremost an opportunity to give back to younger generations, to educate the student and open their eyes about new technologies that they may be interested in, first from an educational perspective to grow into that field, but also not only from educational perspective, from their future life perspective, they will be user of these technologies in the future. They will be even maybe owning this autonomous vehicle, or maybe using this as a service in a robo-taxi or an automated shuttle navigations. So we thought this is a great opportunity from our perspective to open their eyes and their perspective about what's coming next, and have them prepared for this future.
Fantastic. Okay. And Greg, as you said, the pandemic has changed the world. And so this was a virtual field trip. Curious about how a virtual field trip works. Before we get into the substance of it, I'm just curious about how you prepare for that, and what are the logistics you do to make a virtual field trip happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to acknowledge that this was a completely new market. It is a completely new industry. At the beginning, there really were no rules. So I think I can break it down for you in about 4 parts. And the first part would be about scouting. So we have a team that's hunting far and wide, interviewing candidates, really trying to find people who are passionate about what they do, who will resonate with kids. We also have a production team. So once we find these people, and we interview them and we find the most exciting parts of their company. How do you approach the story? From what angle? Where do you insert interactions? And what problems are the companies solving? We really want kids to leave with a wow factor, like I can't believe what I just saw. And sometimes for companies, working in the same thing every day, what you find really exciting is so technical that we need to help take a step back and help kids along the journey from where you started as an expert or a company. We have 2 more teams. There's the curriculum team that takes everything that the scouts and producers did and translates that into words that teachers understand in terms of the curriculum. And then we have the field trip team, about 10 people behind the scenes, making sure everything runs smoothly for the experts and the audience, from supporting teachers to the broadcast to sharing media, managing interactions, and so on.
Fantastic. Okay, now we're going to get into it. Let's take a look at a clip from the field trip, and we're going to give people a sense of the kind of education that's happening here. We'll watch the video, and then I'd like for you to tell us what it is we're seeing and what it is that we're trying to teach.
So what we are seeing in this video, first example, before jumping into the solution, to explain to the student what is the challenge that we are trying to solve. And the challenge that we see here is that robots doesn't see human the way we see it. They see them as boxes, as object in the street. And the way we decided to present this problem is by showing them how robots see the world and what type of decision we could make, versus how humans see the world and what type of decision we could make, and see what's the big difference we can bring by adding technologies like psychophysics, like understanding of human behavior into solving this problem. So this would make the field trip and the question and reasoning with the student more interesting and more appealing.
Well, and that's exactly right. And the interactive portion is really interesting because you see the students changing their minds as they begin to understand what's going on. What's the goal of that kind of element of the field trip?
That's a really great question. And the answer is that kids want a live experience happening now. They're so tired of people talking at them, sitting down, watching static videos, reading textbooks, having people speak at them. What's important is the interactive component. And for many, this is the first time since 2020 when it's an actual live event, not pre-recorded, where you can actually have a hand in how it's happening and a hand in how it's changing, and you can see it changing live. Kids want to be asked their opinions, and they want to know that what they have to say is meaningful, is important. They want to feel heard, they want to feel relevant, and they also want to engage with the people making a difference in the world, like Omar.
Yeah.
That's
And
fantastic.
I guess from my perspective as a presenter, it was really interesting because as Gregory mentioned, just giving one-sided presentation is not really interesting, and seeing in something happening from the other side was really rewarding to see this happening.
Omar, I know this idea of humans as a black box is something that Perceptive Automata uses to explain its work and its grown-up communications. What is the lesson here, and how do you adapt this for younger audiences?
Yeah, definitely. We use this black box concept really to illustrate that there is a gap in what current AV companies are doing, and we are enhancing to what they are doing. We're bringing this value by adding this understanding of human behavior in this interaction. When we wanted to present this to a younger audience, we know that nowadays high school students are really aware of newer technologies. They are well educated. This is no longer for them science fiction. This is a reality. They know about AI, and we'll see the way they ask questions is really interesting. So for us, it was mostly around keeping the concept, but trying to guiding them on how we're using this black box concept to explain and how to make sure we are understanding a gap and we are answering and bridge this gap by these newer technologies. So for us, it's really making this transition easier for them from concepts to how we're solving the problem.
That's fantastic. And then Greg, when the kids were presented with this material, what kinds of questions did they have? I'm curious what they were most interested in and what grabbed their attention.
Speaking of questions, that was a great question. And here, I'll show you exactly what the students saw during the experience itself. And so you can see the questions were really all over the map, reflecting the full diversity of the audiences from every background, from with different interests. A lot of questions about robots and emotions, about connecting it to what the limited knowledge they have about robotics and AI. Questions about, how, for example, you can see here, how does self-driving work, or even sustainability questions around pollution. And it's really nice to see really where the current generation is at, and to see that to engage them on their level, it's not about talking to them about what we find fascinating. It's about letting them drive the whole experience, and letting their questions guide exactly what is shown, exactly what is discussed, and exactly how we choose to interact with them.
Those are absolutely fantastic. I love the can robots hurt themselves? That is wonderful. And then, Omar, I know that kids aren't the typical audience for the work that you do at Perceptive Automata. What did you at the company get out of this experience? And I'm curious if it's something you'd recommend to other AV firms who are trying to host field trips.
Yeah, although they are not the typical audience, we're really amazed by the type of question that was shown there and how involved they are. I guess going back to the first, to what I said before, one of the main item is our drive to give back to this younger generation and make sure that they are aware about these technologies and they're well prepared. From my personal level, I have 2 daughters, and I was very excited to prepare this field trip because the first thing I was having in my mind that I will present this to my daughters, and how I make them aware about these new technologies and make them really trigger this desire in them to explore more, do more. And I guess from us as a company, we see this as really important. And I think this should be an obligation for the industry overall to bring this awareness about this reality that will happen for the next generation that's coming in.
That's fantastic. And Greg, I understand that you have more AV related field trips coming up this year. Can you give us some examples of the topics and the companies you're visiting and the goals of those field trips?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really across the map. Right now, we have another program called Future of Transportation with other members of PAVE, with Navia and Algolux. It's really about how cities are changing, excuse me, and how we're changing with it. So on the English event, we're going to the University of Michigan's AV test track with Navia. And in French, we're actually going to Navia's factory in France to see how it's made. Both experiences then go to Algolux to see how they're training autonomous vehicles for inclement conditions, snow, fog, heavy rain, darkness, and other conditions that AVs may not be particularly suited for yet. And finally, we're going to Ericsson, which is an organization that's helping reconstruct cities so that with 5G, the Internet of Things, we can actually accommodate entire fleets of autonomous vehicles. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We have so many in the works, from starting with AV companies, then going to automated distribution centers, AV manufacturers, then visiting sensor factories, for example, and then mines, seeing where the raw materials come from to actually support this industry. And there's a new one in the works, which you may or may not hear about soon. It's around AV first responders, so ambulances, and then going straight into a live surgery to see what happens on the other side of that. So lots of exciting things, a lot of unexpected things. And the goal is by combining AV with other industries is really to expand the demographic, expand the interest, and help AV companies reach people who they couldn't on their own, and help kids explore entirely new worlds outside of what they thought their interest areas were.
Those are questions we hear at PAVE all the time, even from adults who are first responders. How do you stop an autonomous vehicle? It's fascinating things to think about. If other schools or educators are interested in doing something like this, or if other companies are interested in hosting a field trip, is there a way that they can do that through E2?
Yeah, I presume you'll share this with today's listeners. So classes can visit our website at www.e2adventures.com, or they can write us directly on our website or email us directly at info@e2adventures.com with your interest to be featured or sponsor our field trip program. We can also accommodate entire classes, school districts, for thousands of people simultaneously. We're really come one, come all.
Fantastic. And are there any limits to the number of events that you can facilitate, or what guidance would you give others who want to do something similar?
Yeah, so we are a startup. We're delivering as many events as we can. There is a limit to it. And what's difficult is that, it's near impossible to emulate it. We're really writing the script right now. It's the first of its kind. We're pioneers in the industry. We're constantly adapting to trends that are changing month after month. But for teachers who have contacts in industries, who are dead set on visiting AV companies, and we totally support that, because we know that the future of education is experiential. So if teachers run an online event, my expert advice to them would be to make it relatable for students. So connect what you're seeing to what's going on in the world, to what the students are talking about, connect it to how the world is changing. So they may have heard about AI. How does it relate to where you're going? 5G, how does it relate? Internet of Things, how does it relate? And also to imagine how AVs are used. It's also important to approach it like a system. So students may be interested in law. And so to sell them the idea on AV, start by talking to a lawyer, and then have the lawyer be in conversation with the AV company about all the legal things that can happen with industry. Or if you're a social sciences teacher, for instance, and you're wondering, how do I connect this to my class? Think about the system, not just the company. And so if you're on your unit about geography, or rather where raw materials come from, ask, where are the raw materials coming from for this industry, for that company that you're going to visit? And what we also like to do when it's a one-on-one conversation is for the teacher to actually lead the trip and to pause the trip and talk to the students about how what they're seeing actually relates to what they're learning in class. Lastly, for companies who are looking to run visits on their own, all I have to say is focus on the action. Students, as everyone knows, are just so tired of being talked at. They want to see cool stuff. Make it immersive and fun. And also contact our team to get started. We're the only ones in North America training companies on how to present to students in an online format.
Fantastic. Omar, any final thoughts that we haven't covered? Or I know you mentioned your own daughters. Why are trips like this so important?
Yeah, so I would like just to jump into the multidisciplinary aspect of these field trips. I really found this very useful and helpful for the students, because, for example, in our field trip, we went from talking about the gene and how humans are different, and talking to the behavior of human, and then we landed on AI and how AI will solve these problems. And by showing these two concepts before, it helps to explain to the student that every human being is unique. We are all different. We all have our own behavior, and that are built around our gene or our lived experiences. So this will help the student to understand how difficult and how extremely difficult for robots to understand this human and why the type of AI using psychophysics, using behavioral sciences was helpful to solve this problem. So seeing the big picture is always important rather than just jumping into one technology and how it works.
Okay, and Greg, any final thoughts from you?
Yes. As we all know, the world is changing and the AV industry is in the middle of that change. And the future, as we're building it today, will be very, very different than what kids see in school. And therefore, the AV industry has such an important role to play in getting the next generation on board. AV companies, I sincerely believe, have the power to transform the education system, transform the curriculum, so that what is discussed in schools is applied to the innovations, the ingenuity, the problems that are being broached in school, in businesses today. And by reaching massive audiences through interactive virtual field trips that make kids excited, that speak to teachers' needs, no matter what they're teaching, no matter what their interests are, is the way forward to reach an entire generation and transform our future and our present as we know it.
Thank you. It's amazing work you're doing, and appreciate you both in your efforts to expand AV education, which is what PAVE does every day. Thank you so much for telling us the story about your field trip. Omar Assad from Perceptive Automata and Gregory Frank from E2 Adventures.
Thank you very much
for having us.